For my graduation, then the speaker shocked everyone. Kihbangots. I remember the exact second something inside me finally broke, and it wasn't during the hardest exam, or the longest night shift, or even the moment I signed my life away on student loans. It was the moment my phone buzzed in the middle of my graduation ceremony, and I read a message from my mother that felt colder than anything I had ever experienced. Enjoy your ceremony. We're by the pool. Don't make this a big deal. I was sitting in a stadium filled with over 10,000 people, surrounded by families cheering, crying, holding flowers, waving signs with names written in glitter and love, and right in front of me were 4 empty seats with my family's name printed on them like a quiet joke that only I understood. For a few seconds, I just stared at those seats, hoping maybe they were late, maybe something had happened, maybe I had misunderstood, but deep down I already knew the truth. Because this wasn't new, this wasn't shocking, this was familiar, painfully familiar, like a story my life had been telling me over and over again. I locked my phone, placed it in my lap, and tried to breathe normally while the noise around me kept rising, applause echoing across the stadium like waves I couldn't feel anymore, because inside, everything had gone quiet. If you've ever been surrounded by people and still felt completely alone, then you already understand what that moment felt like. And if you haven't, stay with me, because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about family, success, and what it really means to be seen. I wasn't always strong, and I definitely wasn't always this calm about it, because the truth is, I spent most of my life trying to earn love that was never meant to be given freely. I grew up in a house where attention was not something you received, it was something you competed for, and unfortunately, I was never the one winning. My younger sister, Vanessa, had a kind of presence that made people stop and look. She knew how to smile at the right time, how to say the right thing, how to exist in a way that made people feel entertained. And, in my parents' world, that was everything. Meanwhile, I was quiet, focused, buried in books, chasing something long-term in a family that only valued what looked good in the moment. And maybe that's where everything started going wrong, because I believed that if I worked hard enough, achieved enough, sacrificed enough, eventually they would have no choice but to see me. But I was wrong, and the day I finally understood that wasn't the day I failed, it was the day I succeeded the most. The truth is, I didn't always realize what was happening to me when I was younger, because when you grow up inside something, it doesn't feel wrong, it just feels normal. I thought every family had favorites. I thought it was normal for one child to be celebrated while the other one quietly disappeared into the background. I didn't even question it at first. I just adjusted, like children do when they're trying to survive emotionally in a space that was never built for them. Vanessa didn't have to try very hard to be loved. That was the part that used to confuse me the most. She didn't study late into the night, she didn't push herself past exhaustion, she didn't sacrifice anything that made her uncomfortable, but somehow she always had everyone's attention. I remember one night so clearly it almost feels like it's still happening. She had just placed third in a small local talent show. Third. Not first, not even second. But you would have thought she had just won something life-changing by the way my parents reacted. My father stood up in the middle of the auditorium, clapping louder than anyone else, smiling like he had just witnessed greatness, and my mother was already texting people before the event even ended, telling them how proud she was. The next night, they hosted a full celebration dinner. Not just dinner, a production. A private room at an expensive restaurant, guests invited, speeches prepared, a custom cake with Vanessa's face printed on it like she was already someone important. I sat at the end of that table, listening to people talk about her star quality, her natural talent, her future, while quietly eating my food and wondering what it must feel like to be seen that way. No one asked me anything that night, not a single question. And the strange thing is, I didn't even feel angry. Not yet, I just felt invisible, like I was there physically, but not really part of the moment. 2 years later, everything changed for me, or at least I thought it would. I graduated at the top of my class, valedictorian, perfect GPA, full academic scholarship. Every measurable standard of success you could think of, I had reached it. For the first time in my life, I allowed myself to believe something dangerous, that maybe this would be enough. Standing at that podium, looking out at hundreds of people listening to me speak. I felt proud, not in an arrogant way, but in a quiet, grounded way, like I had finally built something real with my own effort. People stood up when I finished. Some of them were crying. It should have been one of the happiest moments of my life. And then I walked off that stage and found my parents. That's when reality came back. My father was checking his phone, not even pretending to pay attention. My mother looked at me like she had just sat through something mildly inconvenient. She didn't hug me. She didn't smile. She didn't say she was proud. She just sighed and said, "Your speech was too long. You used too many complicated words. People probably lost interest." I remember standing there, holding my diploma, feeling like the ground had just shifted under me. Vanessa laughed softly and patted my shoulder like I had tried my best but somehow missed the point. We didn't celebrate that night. There was no dinner, no photos, no moment. We went home. And I ate leftovers alone in the kitchen while they watched TV in the living room like nothing had happened. That was the night something inside me changed. Not dramatically, not loudly, just quietly. I stopped expecting anything from them. And in a strange way, that was the beginning of my freedom. Because if no one was going to believe in me, then I had nothing left to lose by believing in myself. That was the night I decided I was going to become a doctor. Not for them anymore. Not for approval. For me. That decision changed everything. But not in the way I thought it would. Because I believed that if I reached a level they couldn't ignore, they would finally have no choice but to see me. So I gave everything to it. I stopped looking for encouragement. I replaced it with discipline. While other students balanced school and life, I eliminated anything that didn't move me forward. I studied until my eyes burned. I worked until my body gave out. I pushed myself past limits I didn't even know I had. And eventually, it worked. I got in. One of the top medical schools in the country. I still remember the moment I opened that acceptance email. I was sitting alone in my tiny apartment. Rain hitting the window. Silence everywhere. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Then I dropped to my knees. And I cried. Not quiet tears. Not controlled tears. Real tears. Because every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt, it had all led to that moment. I printed the letter, held it in my hands like it was something sacred. And for the first time in years, I felt something I probably shouldn't have allowed myself to feel again. Hope. I thought, this is it. This is the moment everything changes. So I went home. Sunday dinner. Same long table, same polished silence. But this time, I wasn't invisible. I had proof. I waited until we were all seated. Until the conversation slowed. My hands were shaking slightly as I slid the folder across the table toward my father. "I got in," I said. My voice was steady, but my heart wasn't. "One of the top programs. I'm going to specialize in pediatric surgery." For a moment, no one spoke. And in that silence, I let myself believe. Just for a second, that this was going to be different. But my father didn't open the folder. He didn't even touch it. He just looked at it, like it didn't matter. Then, slowly, he pushed it back toward me. "We can't take on that kind of financial risk," he said calmly. Like he was declining a business deal. At first, I thought I misunderstood him. "I'm not asking for money," I said quickly. "I just need you to co-sign. That's it. I'll pay everything back myself." I leaned forward slightly, trying to keep my voice steady. "If I don't secure the loan, I lose my place." Silence. Then my mother's sigh hid. That same familiar sound. The one that always made me feel like I was asking for too much just by existing. "Julian, lower your voice," she said. "You're being selfish." Selfish. The word hit harder than anything else. "I've worked for this my entire life," I said, my voice breaking despite trying to control it. "And we have other priorities right now," she replied. "Other priorities." I stared at her. What could possibly be more important than this? That's when Vanessa finally looked up from her phone. She smiled. Not kindly. Not proudly. Just casually. "I'm launching my brand next month," she said. "Lifestyle, wellness, curated products. It's going to be big." My father straightened slightly in his chair. "We're investing in her," he added. $50,000 to get it started properly. 50,000. The number echoed in my head. They wouldn't sign a piece of paper for me. But they handed her 50,000 in cash. For something that didn't even exist yet. And suddenly, everything became clear. This was never about money. It was never about risk. It was about value. And in their world, I didn't have any. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just reached forward, picked up the folder, and placed it back into my bag. I understand, I said quietly. And for the first time in my life, I actually meant it. I stood up. No one stopped me. No one called my name. I walked out of that house, and I didn't look back. The next morning, I went straight to the financial aid office. And I signed the papers. High-interest loans. No co-signer. Every signature felt heavy. Like I was handing over pieces of my future, just to keep moving forward. But I didn't hesitate. Because I had already made my choice. If I wanted this life, I was going to have to build it alone. If you've ever had to choose between your future and the people who were supposed to support you, then you already know. That's not really a choice at all. I still remember the silence that followed that dinner because it wasn't just the absence of sound, it was the absence of me in that room, like I had been physically present but emotionally erased, and even after I walked upstairs that night, closed my door, and sat in the dark for hours, the feeling didn't leave. It just settled deeper into me, like something permanent had shifted inside. I didn't cry at first. I just sat there replaying everything over and over again. My father's expression when he pushed the folder back, my mother's tone when she called my dreams selfish, Vanessa's smile like it was all some kind of joke I didn't understand, and I kept thinking there had to be a version of that moment where I said something different, where I explained better, where they finally saw me. But the truth was, I had been trying to be seen my entire life. And nothing had ever changed. That night, something inside me stopped asking for permission. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly. Like a decision forming in the background of everything else. I remember opening my laptop and staring at the acceptance letter from medical school again. Not because I needed to reread it, but because I needed to remind myself it was real. That I hadn't imagined it. That everything I had sacrificed hadn't been for nothing. And then I did something I had never done before. I stopped thinking about what they would say. I stopped imagining approval. I stopped waiting for validation that was never coming. Instead, I started planning a life that didn't include them at the center of it. The next morning, I went to the financial aid office alone. No discussion, no second opinion, no safety net waiting on the other side. Just me, a stack of forms, and a reality I didn't fully want to accept but couldn't avoid anymore. The loans I signed that day didn't feel like paperwork. They felt like weight. Every signature was a reminder that I was stepping into something irreversible, something that would shape my entire future, and I knew exactly what it meant. High interest, long years, the pressure I would carry alone, but I also knew something else. It was the only way forward. So I signed anyway. After that, my life stopped looking like a student's life. It stopped looking like anything normal at all. I took the EMT job overnight because I needed to survive, not because I wanted to, and very quickly my days stopped having any real separation between morning and night, just a constant rotation of exhaustion, movement, and survival. I would wake up before sunrise, attend lectures that blurred together from lack of sleep, try to absorb information while my body felt like it was running on empty, then go straight into studying, until I had to leave again for work. And at night, I saw things most people my age never had to see. Accidents, emergencies, moments where people were at their most fragile, their most human, their most broken. Then I would sit in the back of an ambulance, shaking slightly from adrenaline, trying to memorize pharmacology notes under flickering lights, while the world outside kept moving without me. There were nights I thought I wouldn't make it through. Not because I wanted to quit, but because my body simply felt like it couldn't keep up anymore. And every time I reached that point, I would think about that dinner table again. Not with anger. Not anymore. With clarity. Because I finally understood something I had refused to accept before. I wasn't tired because I was weak. I was tired because I had been carrying people who never once carried me back. Months passed like that. Slowly at first, then all at once. And somewhere in that exhaustion, something unexpected started happening. I stopped waiting for my family to notice me, And in that space they left behind, other people started stepping in. Professors who didn't dismiss my effort. Doctors who treated me like I belonged in the room. Strangers in hospital corridors who simply said, "Good job," without needing a reason to justify it. It wasn't grand. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real. And slowly, that became enough to keep me going. The day I got my acceptance into one of the top medical programs in the country, I didn't run to anyone's house. I didn't expect celebration. I didn't even think about sharing it immediately. I just stood there in my apartment holding the email open on my screen, reading it again and again until it finally felt real enough to breathe. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I needed anyone else to validate it. I just felt still, like something had finally aligned in a way that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. But even then, there was a part of me that wasn't fully healed yet. A part that still wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, they would show up when it really mattered. That belief didn't disappear overnight. It lingered quietly, even as I moved forward, even as I built a life that didn't require them, even as I started becoming someone I was actually proud of. Because hope like that doesn't die easily. It just waits, and sometimes, it waits for the exact moment it can hurt you the most. I didn't know it then, but that moment was coming. The graduation, the empty seats, the message that would arrive at the exact wrong time, and the stadium that would change everything I thought I still needed from them. But before all of that happened, I was still just Julian trying to survive the life I had chosen, not realizing yet that survival would eventually turn into something else entirely. Something stronger. Something they would never be able to take away again. The papers were signed. There was no turning back after that. No safety net. No backup plan. No one to fall back on if things went wrong. Just me, and a future that suddenly felt heavier than I had imagined. The loans covered tuition. That was it. No rent. No food. No textbooks. No life. So I did what I had to do. I found a job. Actually, more like a second life. I became an EMT. Night shift. From 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. While everyone else slept, I was out in the dark, riding in the back of an ambulance, responding to emergencies that didn't wait for anyone to be ready. And then at 8 a.m., I was back in class, trying to act like I was just another student, like I had slept, like I was fine. But I wasn't. Not even close. My life turned into something I can only describe as survival mode. I stopped thinking in weeks or months. I thought in hours. Can I get through this lecture? Can I stay awake for this lab? Can I survive this shift tonight? That was it. That was my world. There were nights I saw things I wish I could forget. Car accidents, bleeding, people screaming, people not screaming at all. And then, silence. The kind that stays with you longer than it should. My uniform always smelled the same. Antiseptic, sweat, cheap coffee. And during the rare quiet moments, I would sit in the back of the ambulance, under flickering lights, holding flashcards with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Memorizing drug names, mechanisms, dosage, trying to keep up with a life that didn't slow down just because I was falling apart. I lost weight. My face changed. Dark circles settled under my eyes like they had found a permanent home. I stopped calling people. Stopped answering messages. I didn't have the energy to explain a life no one around me was living. I became something in between. Not fully a student. Not fully a person. Just something moving forward because it had to. There were nights I stood in the shower after a shift. Water running over me. And I couldn't tell if I was exhausted or just empty. Sometimes I cried. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly. Because I was too tired to do anything else, and every time the thought crossed my mind, to quit, to call my father, to say I couldn't do this alone, I remembered his voice, calm, distant, certain. We can't take that risk. And that was enough to keep me going. One more day, one more shift, one more exam, until one night, my body finally gave out. It was around 4 a.m. We had just dropped off a critical patient. My hands were still shaking from the adrenaline crash. My head felt heavy, like it didn't belong to me anymore. And in less than 4 hours, I had a major pharmacology exam. I walked into a quiet break room inside the hospital. Technically, I wasn't even supposed to be there. But I didn't care. I just needed 10 minutes. 10 minutes to breathe. I sat down, opened my textbook, tried to focus. Words blurred together. Lines didn't make sense. My vision faded. And before I even realized what was happening, my head dropped forward. And I was gone. I don't know how long I was asleep, but I woke up suddenly. Not because of noise. Because of presence. Someone was standing in front of me, watching. I sat up instantly. Panic hit me all at once. My heart started racing. I thought I was done. Reported. Written up. Thrown out. Everything I had fought for. Gone. I'm sorry, I said quickly, my voice unsteady. I just finished a shift. I have an exam. I didn't mean to. She didn't respond. She didn't interrupt. She didn't react at all. She just looked at the open page in front of me, then pointed at it. Explain this. Her voice was calm, but there was no room for hesitation in it. For a split second, my mind went completely blank. Fear took over. But then, something else followed. Instinct. Everything I had studied, everything I had suffered through, it came back. And I started speaking. I explained the mechanism, the receptors, the downstream effects. Faster, clearer, stronger. I didn't stop. Not for a second. When I finished, the room went completely silent. She looked at me. Really looked at me. Not like I was a problem. Not like I was in the way. But like she was trying to understand something. Why are you working full-time night shifts? She asked. I didn't hesitate. Because I have to, I said. No explanation. No story. Just the truth. Another pause. Then she nodded once. Small. Decisive. Be in my office at 3 p.m. today, she said. Then she turned. And walked out. Just like that. Leaving me sitting there. Confused. Exhausted. And somehow, hopeful. For the first time in a long time. Sometimes, the moment that changes your life doesn't look dramatic. It looks quiet. Like someone simply seeing you, when no one else ever did. The stadium should have felt like a victory, but the moment I stepped inside that morning, all I could feel was distance, like I was walking into a memory that didn't fully belong to me yet. And even though the air was filled with celebration, with families laughing, crying, taking photos, there was a quiet tension inside me that I couldn't explain. It wasn't fear exactly. It was expectation. The kind that builds when you've waited your whole life for something that might never actually arrive. I kept telling myself not to look at the empty seats. 4 of them, front row, reserved. But it's strange how your eyes always go to the one place you're trying to avoid, and every time I saw them, something inside me tightened just a little more, because I already knew, deep down, before the ceremony even started, that they weren't coming. Still, I didn't want to fully believe it. Not yet. Because hope is stubborn like that. It doesn't leave when it should. It waits until the very last second to break you. When the ceremony began, I tried to focus on the names being called, the applause rising and falling in waves, the pride in the air that belonged to everyone except me, or at least that's how it felt at first. Sitting there in the front row alone, while people around me were surrounded by families, cameras, flowers, hands reaching out to hold them. I told myself it was fine. I told myself I had come this far without them, so I could finish this moment without them too. But then my phone vibrated. Once. Then again. A message from my mother. I remember staring at it for a second before opening it, not because I expected anything good, but because some part of me still reacted before logic could catch up. Enjoy your ceremony. Don't make this a big emotional thing just because we're not there. I read it twice. Maybe 3 times. And I didn't even realize I had stopped breathing properly until I locked my phone and placed it face down in my lap. That was the moment something shifted inside me. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just quietly final. Like a door closing that I had been holding open for years without realizing it. The ceremony continued, but I wasn't fully inside it anymore. My body was there, but my attention drifted somewhere else, somewhere quieter, somewhere heavier, until the dean finally stepped forward to introduce the keynote speaker. That's when everything changed. Because the moment she walked onto the stage, the entire atmosphere shifted. Dr. Evelyn Carter didn't need an introduction that lasted more than a few seconds. The reaction from the crowd said everything before she even spoke, a wave of recognition, respect, almost tension, because people like her don't just enter a room, they change it. She moved with calm precision, no hesitation, no unnecessary movement, and when she reached the podium, she didn't immediately begin her prepared speech. She just paused. That pause lasted longer than it should have. Long enough for me to notice. Long enough for something in my chest to tighten again, because I could see it in her expression before she said anything. Something had changed in her plan. She looked down at her notes, then closed them. Slowly. Deliberately. And the sound of that folder shutting felt louder than anything else in the stadium. When she spoke, her voice wasn't theatrical. It wasn't emotional in the way people expect speeches to be. It was controlled, focused, real. I prepared a speech for today, she said, looking out at the crowd, about the future of medicine. A pause. But that would ignore reality. The entire stadium seemed to lean in without realizing it. I want to talk about something we don't talk about enough, she continued. Sacrifice. And I remember that exact moment because something in me reacted before I even understood why, like my body already knew this wasn't going to be general anymore. This was going to be personal. Her eyes moved slowly across the front rows, and then they stopped. Right on me. For a fraction of a second, I thought I was imagining it. But then she spoke again. There is a student sitting in this front row today. My stomach dropped. Not from fear, from recognition. Because something about the way she said it didn't feel like coincidence anymore. It is easy to look at someone like that and see success, she said, her voice steady, but what you don't see is what it cost. The stadium was completely silent now. No applause, no movement. Just listening. She earned her place here on merit, Dr. Carter continued. But she needed one thing to secure her future. A pause. Just a signature. I felt my fingers tighten without realizing it. She didn't receive it. That sentence didn't just land, it spread. Through the seats, through the air, through the silence that followed like a shockwave. She was told she was too much of a financial risk, she said, her tone sharpening slightly, while her family chose instead to fund another path entirely for her sibling. I could hear it now. Small reactions in the crowd, whispering, confusion, people starting to realize this wasn't abstract. This was real. And because of that, she continued, she took on debt that most people her age would never be able to carry. My breathing felt uneven now. She worked overnight shifts in emergency medical services while attending one of the most demanding academic programs in the country. A pause. And still, she said, she didn't fall behind. She led. The word hit harder than the rest. Led. Not survived, not struggled. Led. She became one of the top students in her class, Dr. Carter said, her voice rising just slightly, not because her life was easier, but because she refused to stop. I didn't realize I was shaking until I felt it in my hands. Because for the first time, I wasn't just hearing my story in pieces. I was hearing it fully, out loud, in front of everyone. And today, she said, softer now, almost quieter. Her family is not in those seats. Her eyes shifted again, to the empty front row. You would think they would be here, she continued. A pause. But they are not. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything before it. Then she said the names. Richard, Elaine, Cole. And that was the moment everything inside me stopped trying to hold itself together. Because it wasn't just about absence anymore. It was about choice. Deliberate, repeated, clear. The crowd reacted instantly. Shock, disbelief, murmurs rising, people turning to look, to confirm, to understand. And I just sat there in the middle of it, completely exposed, unable to disappear the way I always had before. But then something unexpected happened. The applause started. Slow at first, then stronger. And I realized, in a way I didn't fully understand yet, that this wasn't pity. It was acknowledgement. Real acknowledgement. Dr. Carter stepped back from the microphone slightly and looked at me directly. Not like a student, not like a statistic. Like a colleague. "We see you," she said. And for the first time in my life, I believed it. I barely remember how I got through the rest of that morning because everything after that moment felt like it was happening somewhere far away from me, like my body was moving through the day but my mind was still stuck on one sentence that refused to leave: be in my office at 3 p.m. And no matter how much I tried to focus on the exam in front of me, on the questions, on the answers I had studied for weeks, part of me kept going back to the way she said it: calm, certain, like it wasn't a suggestion but something that was already decided. By the time the clock got close to 3, I was standing outside her office, dressed in the most professional outfit I owned, which honestly wasn't much, but I had ironed it carefully, fixed my hair, tried to make myself look like someone who belonged in that hallway, even though deep down I still felt like I was just pretending. When I knocked and heard her voice tell me to come in, something in my chest tightened in a way I couldn't control. Not fear exactly, but something close to it, like standing on the edge of something you don't fully understand yet. Her office was exactly what you would expect from someone like her. Everything clean, organized, intentional, walls filled with awards, framed research, years of achievements that didn't need to be explained because you could feel them the moment you stepped inside. And when she gestured for me to sit, I did, quietly, carefully, trying not to make a single wrong move. She didn't waste time with small talk, didn't ask how I was, didn't pretend this was casual. She just looked at me and said she had reviewed my file that morning. And the way she said it made my stomach tighten instantly, because I didn't know if I was about to be praised or dismissed. She went through my academic record like it was something factual, not emotional. Top of the class, strong evaluations, consistent performance, and for a brief second I felt something rise in my chest, something close to pride. Like maybe this was finally it. Maybe someone was actually going to acknowledge what I had done. But then she paused, leaned forward slightly, and said something that hit much deeper than anything else could have. "But physically, you're deteriorating." There was no judgment in her voice, no criticism, just truth. The kind of truth you can't argue with, because your body already knows it's real. And when she said that if I continued like this, I wouldn't make it to residency, something inside me dropped because I had been thinking the same thing for months, but refusing to say it out loud. I looked down at my hands, not because I didn't want to answer, but because I didn't know how to explain a life that felt like it was constantly one step away from collapsing. And the only thing I could say was the truth, simple and unfiltered, that I didn't have a choice. And that was when everything changed. She didn't argue with me, didn't tell me I was wrong, didn't give me advice about managing time or taking care of myself. She just said, "You do now." And those 3 words felt heavier than anything else that had been said in that room. When she explained the research project, the responsibility, the expectations, I listened, but it wasn't until she mentioned the stipend, the flexibility, the fact that it would replace my current income, that my heart started beating faster, not out of anxiety this time, but something else, something I hadn't felt in a long time: relief. And when she said she expected me to resign from my EMT position, that was the moment it fully hit me, not just what she was offering, but what it meant, because my own parents had refused to sign a single piece of paper to help me move forward, and here was someone who had known me for less than an hour offering me a way to survive. I didn't plan to cry, I didn't want to cry, but the second I tried to say something, anything, my voice broke and everything I had been holding in for years just came out all at once: the exhaustion, the pressure, the silence, the constant feeling of having to prove that I deserved to exist in spaces where no one had ever made room for me. I covered my face because I couldn't stop it, and for a moment I was embarrassed, not because I was weak, but because I wasn't used to being seen like that, not like this, not when I wasn't holding everything together perfectly. But she didn't interrupt me, didn't rush me, didn't look uncomfortable. She simply reached across the desk and placed a box of tissues in front of me like this was normal, like breaking down after holding everything in for too long wasn't something to hide. When I finally looked up, her expression had softened just enough to feel human, and she told me to take the weekend, to rest, and to be in the lab on Monday. And there was something about the way she said it that made it clear this wasn't an offer I needed to question. It was a path that had already opened. That weekend was the first time in years I allowed myself to slow down, even just a little, and when Monday came, I walked into that lab knowing something had shifted, not just in my situation, but in how I saw myself. Working with her changed everything, not overnight, not magically, but steadily, in a way that felt real. She pushed me harder than anyone ever had, but she also respected the effort I gave, and that combination was something I had never experienced before. For the first time in my life, my work wasn't ignored, it wasn't minimized, it wasn't compared, it was seen, evaluated, and valued for what it actually was. And that changed the way I moved through everything. My performance improved, then it accelerated. I moved to the top of my class, built relationships with people who didn't make me feel small, people who showed up without conditions, and slowly, without even realizing it at first, I started building a life that felt like it belonged to me. But even then, even after everything had changed, there was still a small part of me that hadn't let go, a quiet, stubborn part that still believed that if my parents could just see me now, if they could just witness what I had become, maybe everything would finally be different. And that belief was the most dangerous thing I was still holding on to. I didn't realize how dangerous that hope was until the moment my phone rang 10 days before graduation, and I saw my mother's name on the screen, because even after everything, after the silence, the distance, the years of proving myself without them, my heart still reacted the same way it always had. Fast, unsteady, like maybe this time would finally be different. Her voice came through bright, almost cheerful, like nothing had ever happened, like there had never been years of absence between us, and she told me they had received my invitation, that they were flying me home for the weekend, that there would be a family dinner at the country club and my attendance was mandatory, and I remember standing there holding the phone, feeling something rise in my chest that I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Real, dangerous hope that made everything else feel small for a moment, because I immediately started imagining what that night would look like, the way my father might stand up in front of everyone and finally introduce me with pride, the way my mother might talk about my residency like it actually mattered, the way the room might shift just enough for me to finally feel like I belonged there. I didn't question it. I didn't stop to think about the past or the patterns or the way things had always ended before. I just said yes, booked the flight, packed something that made me feel like the person I had worked so hard to become, and let myself believe in a version of reality that had never existed before. The entire flight home felt like I was replaying a scene that hadn't happened yet but already felt real, like I was rehearsing the moment they would finally see me, finally understand, finally choose me in a way they never had before, and by the time the plane landed, I had convinced myself so completely that I didn't even consider the possibility that I was wrong. When I arrived at the country club that night, everything looked exactly the same as it always had, polished, controlled, perfect in a way that never felt real, and as I walked toward the private dining room, I could feel my heart beating faster with every step. Not out of fear this time, but anticipation, like I was about to walk into something I had been waiting my entire life for. But the moment I opened the door, something felt off. There were no banners, no decorations that mentioned graduation, no signs that this night had anything to do with me, and for a second I thought maybe I had walked into the wrong room until I saw the balloons, large, silver, impossible to ignore, floating near the ceiling, and forming a number that didn't make sense. Ewen. I stood there longer than I should have, trying to connect it to something, anything, but it meant nothing to me, and as I stepped further inside, the rest of the room came into focus. The familiar faces, the laughter, the carefully curated crowd that had always surrounded my parents, and then I saw her, Vanessa, standing in the center of the room, glowing, smiling, completely at ease in a space that had always been designed for her, and it didn't take long for the realization to settle in because the answer came too easily once I allowed myself to see it. This wasn't my celebration. It never had been. When I asked what we were celebrating, the response came casually, almost proudly, like it was something obvious, something worth honoring, and that was when I found out that Vanessa had reached 10,000 followers online, and that this entire event, the dinner, the guests, the effort, was all for her. The weight of it didn't hit gradually, it dropped all at once, because they knew. They had read my letter, they knew about my graduation, my residency, Everything I had fought for, and still, they chose to bring me here not to celebrate me, but to sit quietly in the background while my sister was praised for something that, in any other context, wouldn't have mattered at all. I took my seat at the far end of the table, the same place I had always ended up, the place where I could see everything clearly without ever being part of it, and dinner unfolded exactly the way it always had. Conversations revolving around Vanessa, her brand, her future, her potential, while my existence remained completely untouched by any of it. No one asked me about medical school. No one mentioned my graduation. It was like I had never sent that invitation at all. And when dessert arrived, when my mother stood up and began speaking, her voice filled with pride, her words carefully chosen to elevate Vanessa even further, I felt something inside me begin to shift. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that felt final. Because then, she made the announcement. They had booked a 10-day luxury cruise to celebrate Vanessa's milestone. They were leaving Thursday. My graduation was Friday. For a moment, everything went quiet, not in the room, but inside me, like the part of me that had been holding on to hope finally understood what it had been refusing to accept all along, and when I stood up and asked the question, my voice didn't sound emotional, it didn't shake, it just came out flat, direct. You're leaving Thursday. My graduation is Friday. My father sighed like I was being unreasonable, like I had misunderstood something obvious, and told me not to make it about myself, that Vanessa needed this opportunity, that the timing worked for her, and that explanation was supposed to be enough. It always had been before. But this time, something was different. Because when Vanessa rolled her eyes and called it just a ceremony, when my father dismissed it as a formality, when no one at that table said a single word in my defense, the last piece of something inside me finally broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just completely. I looked at them, really looked at them, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to convince them of anything, didn't feel the need to explain, to argue, to make them understand, because the truth was already clear. Nothing I did would ever be enough. Not even this. And the moment I accepted that, the weight I had been carrying for years started to disappear. Not all at once, but enough for me to take a step back, to create distance, to finally choose something different. I told them I hoped they enjoyed their trip. No anger. No tears. Just emptiness. And then I walked out. I left the room, the noise, the illusion of something that had never been real, and I didn't look back, not when I reached the hallway, not when I stepped outside, not even when I got into the taxi that took me straight to the airport. Because for the first time in my life, leaving didn't feel like losing something. It felt like finally letting go of something that had been holding me back all along. The morning of graduation arrived quietly, almost too quietly, for a day that was supposed to mean everything, and I remember waking up before my alarm, staring at the ceiling for a long time, not because I was nervous, but because something inside me felt strangely still, like the storm I had been carrying for years had finally burned itself out the night I walked away from that dinner, leaving behind not just my family, but the version of myself that kept hoping they would change. I got dressed slowly, carefully, every movement deliberate, smoothing out the white fabric of my coat, adjusting it until it sat just right on my shoulders, because even if no one else was there to witness it, I needed to feel it for myself. Needed to recognize the weight of everything I had survived to reach this moment. The stadium was already filling when I arrived, thousands of people moving in waves, families carrying flowers, balloons, cameras, voices overlapping in excitement, laughter, pride spilling into the air, in a way that almost felt overwhelming to stand in alone, and as I walked toward my seat, I became painfully aware of the space beside me. 4 chairs. Reserved. Empty. They stood out more than anything else in that entire stadium, not because of what they were, but because of what they weren't. And I tried not to look at them for too long, tried not to let my mind go back to the message from my mother, the one that had arrived earlier that morning, casual, dismissive, like she was commenting on the weather instead of missing the most important day of my life. Enjoy your ceremony. Don't be dramatic about us not being there. I had read it once, then locked my phone and slipped it into my pocket without responding, because there was nothing left to say, nothing left to argue, nothing left to prove. The ceremony began with the usual formality: speeches, introductions, the slow unfolding of a moment that had taken years to reach, and I tried to focus on it, on the sound of names being called, on the applause rising and falling like waves across the stadium, but part of me stayed quiet, detached, like I was observing it from a distance instead of living inside it. And then everything changed. When the dean stepped forward to introduce the keynote speaker, the energy in the stadium shifted instantly, a ripple of recognition moving through the crowd before her name was even spoken. And when it was, the reaction was immediate, loud, filled with respect in a way that made it clear this was someone who didn't just belong on that stage, but defined it. Dr. Evelyn Carter. I felt my chest tighten the moment she walked out, calm, composed, carrying herself with the kind of authority that didn't need to be announced. And for a second, I allowed myself to relax just slightly, because if anyone could bring this moment back to something meaningful, it was her. She stepped up to the podium, placed her notes down, adjusted the microphone, and for a brief moment, everything looked exactly the way it was supposed to: controlled, planned, predictable. But then she stopped. It was subtle at first, just a pause, a shift in her posture, but I noticed it immediately: the way her eyes moved, scanning the front rows, not casually, but intentionally, like she was searching for something specific. And when her gaze landed in my direction, it didn't move away. It stayed. Then it shifted slightly, to the empty seats beside me. And something in her expression changed. She didn't open her notes. She didn't begin the speech she had prepared. Instead, she closed the folder slowly and set it aside. The movement was quiet, but it carried weight, the kind that makes people pay attention without understanding why yet. And as she leaned slightly closer to the microphone, the entire stadium seemed to settle into silence, waiting for something that no longer followed the script. "I prepared a speech for today," she began, her voice steady, controlled, but there was something underneath it, something sharper, something real, about the future of medicine, about responsibility, about innovation. She paused, but that would ignore something important. The silence deepened, spreading outward like a ripple until even the smallest movements in the crowd seemed to disappear, and I felt my pulse quicken, not from fear, but from the sense that whatever she was about to say wasn't just a speech anymore. "Today," she continued, her voice gaining strength, "I want to talk about sacrifice." My hands tightened in my lap without me realizing it, because something inside me already knew. "I want to tell you about one student," she said, and in that moment, my breath caught, completely, because I felt it before I understood it. The shift, the direction, the weight of her words landing somewhere far too close to me. A student sitting in the front row today. The world seemed to narrow instantly, the noise fading into something distant, unreal, and I couldn't move, couldn't even think properly as she continued, each word steady, deliberate, impossible to ignore. "She earned her place here on merit," Dr. Carter said. "She needed only one thing to secure her future, not money, not privilege, just a signature." A murmur moved through the crowd. She was denied. The reaction was immediate, quiet but sharp, a shift in the energy that spread row by row as people leaned in, listening more closely now, understanding that this wasn't just a story, it was something real. "She was told she was a financial risk, Dr. Carter continued, her voice cutting through the silence, while her family chose instead to invest $50,000 into a social media venture for her younger sister. The murmur grew louder. Confusion, shock, disbelief. And I sat there frozen, every word hitting like something physical, something I couldn't block or deflect or pretend didn't matter anymore, because it did, it still did, even after everything. "Because of that decision," she said, "this student took on high-interest loans to remain in school." I could feel my heartbeat in my throat now. She worked overnight shifts as an EMT from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m., then attended classes at 8 a.m., performing at the highest level while surviving on minimal sleep, minimal resources, and no support from the people who should have been there. The stadium was completely silent. No movement, no whispers, just listening. "She did not fail," Dr. Carter said, her voice rising slightly now, carrying across the entire space. "She excelled. She rose to the top of her class, She became one of the most exceptional students I have seen in over 20 years. My vision blurred. I didn't realize I was crying until I felt it, warm, uncontrollable, sliding down my face while I sat there unable to hide, unable to disappear the way I always had before. And today, she continued, softer now, but somehow even stronger, she sits in the front row, alone. Her eyes moved again to the empty seats beside me. You would think her family would be here. The silence was heavy now. You would think they would be sitting in these seats, proud. A pause. But they are not. The words landed like a final truth that couldn't be undone. Do you want to know why? She asked. No one answered. No one moved. Because they chose not to come. The reaction broke through the silence like a wave, gasps, whispers, voices rising in disbelief as the reality of what she was saying settled into the crowd, not as a distant story, but something happening right here, right now. They chose instead, she said, her voice steady, unwavering, to take their younger daughter on a luxury vacation to celebrate her reaching 10,000 followers online. And that was the moment everything exploded. The disbelief turned into something louder, something sharper, reactions spreading in every direction, people shaking their heads, some openly expressing shock, others unable to hide their anger at what they were hearing, and through all of it, I sat there, completely exposed, every part of my story no longer hidden, no longer minimized, no longer something I had to carry alone. Then she did something I will never forget. She turned slightly and pointed at me. That student, she said, her voice clear, unwavering, is Dr. Julian Cole. The screens lit up instantly. My face filled them. There was no escaping it now. No shrinking, no hiding. Just truth. Raw, visible, real. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible anymore. For a few seconds after my name echoed across the stadium, I couldn't move, I couldn't even think clearly, because the sound of 10,000 people reacting all at once didn't feel real. It felt like something distant and overwhelming at the same time. Like my entire life had been turned inside out in front of the world, and there was nowhere left to hide, nowhere left to shrink back into the version of myself that had always stayed quiet just to keep the peace. My hands were shaking as I stood up, not because I was afraid, but because something inside me was breaking open in a way I had never experienced before. And when the applause started to build, slowly at first, then louder, stronger, spreading across the stadium like a wave that refused to stop, it hit me all at once that this wasn't sympathy, it wasn't pity, it was recognition. Real, undeniable recognition. People weren't clapping because they felt sorry for me. They were standing because they understood what it had taken to get there. I could feel it in the way the sound didn't fade quickly, in the way the people around me leaned closer, some of them smiling, some of them emotional, like they weren't just witnessing a moment, they were sharing it with me, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel invisible inside a crowd. I felt seen, completely. Dr. Carter didn't say anything else for a moment, she just let it happen. Let the sound fill the space, let the truth settle into everyone who was there, and when she finally spoke again, her voice was softer but somehow even more powerful. Your family may not be here, she said, looking directly at me, but look around you. And I did. I looked at the people standing, at the faculty, the students, the strangers who had become something more in that moment, and I realized she was right in a way I hadn't allowed myself to understand before. The medical community is your family now, she continued. We see your strength, we see your sacrifice, and we know your worth. Something inside my chest tightened, but it wasn't pain this time. It was something warmer, something steady, something that didn't depend on approval or validation from people who had never been willing to give it. And we are proud to call you our colleague. The applause rose again, louder this time, stronger, and I stayed there, standing in the middle of it, letting myself feel it fully because I knew this was a moment I would carry for the rest of my life, not because it erased what had happened before, but because it proved that it didn't define me anymore. The ceremony continued after that. Names were called, degrees were given, people celebrated, but everything felt different, like something fundamental had shifted and couldn't be undone. And when it was finally over, and the crowd started to move, families flooding the field to take pictures and embrace each other. I stood there for a moment, watching it all from a distance, not with the same emptiness as before, but with a kind of quiet understanding. I wasn't alone. Not really. My phone started vibrating in my hand before I even realized I had taken it out of my pocket, notifications stacking faster than I could read them, messages, missed calls, names I hadn't seen in years, suddenly appearing all at once, and when I unlocked the screen, it felt like opening a door to something I hadn't expected to face so quickly. The video had already spread. Clipped, shared, reposted across platforms, sent through family group chats, passed through networks I didn't even know I was still connected to, and the reactions were immediate, intense, impossible to control. I opened the first message, then the second, then the third. Hook, anger, disbelief. People were asking questions, demanding explanations, calling out my parents in ways that had never happened before, and as I scrolled, I realized something that felt almost surreal. The truth was no longer something I carried alone. It was visible now. Public. Impossible to rewrite. My mother's message came through seconds later, then another, each one more frantic than the last, but there was no apology, no acknowledgement of what had happened, only panic, only concern for how this looked, for what people were saying, for how it was affecting them. How could you let her say that? You need to fix this. Tell them it's not true. I read every word slowly, carefully, and for the first time, I didn't feel that familiar pull to respond, to defend, to explain, to try to repair something that had never really been whole in the first place. I felt nothing. Not anger. Not sadness. Just clarity. Because the truth was simple now in a way it had never been before. They weren't reaching out because they cared about me. They were reaching out because they had lost control of the narrative. And I wasn't going to give it back to them. I locked my phone, slipped it into my pocket, and looked down at the white coat I was still wearing, running my fingers lightly over the embroidered name, letting the reality of it settle in fully. This was mine. Every part of it. Earned. Built. Protected. Without them, I walked out of that stadium on my own, but the weight I had carried for years didn't follow me anymore. It stayed behind. Somewhere between the empty seats and the applause that had filled the space they chose to leave empty, and for the first time in my life, I understood something that no one had ever taught me directly. Closure doesn't come from the people who hurt you. It comes from the moment you stop needing them to be different. Years passed after that day, not all at once, not in a blur, but in steady, intentional steps forward, and I built a life that felt real, in a way nothing before it ever had. I finished my residency, moved into a surgical position, surrounded myself with people who didn't make support feel conditional, who didn't measure my worth against something else, who simply showed up when it mattered. I didn't go back. Not once. I didn't call. I didn't check. I didn't leave the door open for something that had already shown me exactly what it was. And slowly, the silence between us stopped feeling like loss and started feeling like peace. I heard things, of course, through distant connections, fragments of what had happened after that day, how the video had followed them, how people had questioned them, how the image they had spent years protecting had cracked in a way they couldn't easily repair, and for a moment, I wondered if I should feel something about that. Satisfaction, maybe even justice. But I didn't. Because by then, I had learned something more important. Moving forward matters more than watching others fall behind. Life has a way of balancing things without us forcing it. And holding on to bitterness only keeps you tied to the past you worked so hard to leave. The last thing I want to say, and I mean this from a place that took me years to reach, is that family isn't defined by who shares your blood. It's defined by who stands beside you when it actually matters, who sees you without needing you to shrink, who supports you without turning it into a transaction. Walking away from what hurts you isn't weakness. It's respect for yourself. And choosing to build something better, something healthier, something honest, that's not betrayal. That's growth. If you've ever felt overlooked, dismissed, or made to believe that your efforts don't matter, I want you to hear this clearly. Your value doesn't come from their recognition, it comes from what you continue to build even when no one is watching. And sometimes, the strongest thing you can do isn't proving them wrong. It's choosing yourself and moving forward without needing them to see it. If you stayed with me until this moment, I truly appreciate it, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, where you're watching from, or what part of this story resonated with you the most, because stories like this aren't just about pain, they're about understanding, about growth, about realizing that we all have the ability to change the direction of our lives no matter where we start. Take care of yourself, choose what's healthy for you, and don't be afraid to build a life that finally feels like your own. The silence in the hospital hallway felt different from any silence I had ever known. It wasn't empty. It wasn't calm. It was heavy with everything that had already happened and everything that could still break. I stood just outside the glass consultation room, holding the chart in my hands, my name printed on it in clean, clinical letters. Dr. Julian Hayes, Pediatric Cardiothoracic Surgery. Inside, they were still there. My father pacing. My mother sitting rigidly in her chair. Vanessa staring at the floor like she had finally run out of ways to escape reality. And in the next room, a newborn baby fighting for her life. My niece. They didn't know it yet, but the surgeon they were begging for mercy from was me. For a moment, I just stood there. Not angry anymore. Not hurt. Just still. Because something inside me had already gone through every possible emotional collapse years ago. There was nothing left to break. Only decisions. A nurse walked past me quietly and paused, sensing the tension. "Doctor?" she asked softly. I nodded once. "I'm ready." The words felt strange. Not powerful, not dramatic. Just final. I pushed the door open. The sound was small, but every head inside snapped up instantly. And then it happened. Recognition. Not gradual. Not confused. Instant. My mother's face drained of color so fast she had to grip the chair. My father stopped mid-step, like his body forgot how to continue. Vanessa's hand flew to her mouth before a sound even came out. "Julian," my mother whispered. "No, no, it can't be." I didn't let the moment stretch. "I am Dr. Hayes," I said calmly. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "I've reviewed your daughter's condition." The words landed differently this time. Not as family, not as emotion, as authority. My father recovered first, like he always did when he thought control was slipping. "This is ridiculous," he said sharply. "We didn't come here for this." He gestured at me like I was something misplaced. "You're our son." I looked at him for a long moment. And for the first time, I didn't feel small. "I'm your surgeon right now," I said quietly. The room froze again. My mother stepped forward suddenly, tears already forming. "Julian, please," she said, her voice breaking in a way I had never heard before. "We didn't know it was you. We didn't know." "You didn't know," I repeated softly. Not as a question, as confirmation. There was a long pause. Then I continued. "That's the problem." Silence. No one spoke after that. Not even my father. Because for once, there was nothing left to argue. I turned slightly toward the glass window where the baby was being prepped. "She needs surgery now," I said. Not apologies, not explanations. My voice tightened just a little. Time. That word changed the air instantly. The identity conflict, the past, the resentment, it all collapsed under something far more urgent. Reality. The baby. A life that hadn't even begun yet. I stepped toward the door to scrub in. Behind me, I heard my mother whisper my name again, softer this time. Not demanding. Not controlling. Just broken. But I didn't turn around. Because turning around would have meant going back into something I had already survived, leaving. The operating room was exactly what I needed it to be. Controlled. Silent. Precise. Everything unnecessary removed. I washed my hands under the surgical lights, watching the water run over my skin, grounding myself in something physical instead of emotional. This is what I chose. Not them. Not the past. This. "Vitals stable?" I asked. "Stable but critical," the anesthesiologist replied. I nodded once. "Let's begin." The room shifted instantly into motion. This was the world I understood better than anything else now. Not words. Not memory. Action. Hours passed like minutes. Every movement mattered. Every decision carried weight that could not be reversed. There was no room for hesitation. Only precision. And somewhere in the middle of it all, something inside me settled. Not because it was easy, but because it was right. When I finally stepped back, my gloves were removed slowly. The monitor beeped steadily. Strong, rhythmic, alive. The baby's heart was beating on its own. A sound that filled the room like a quiet victory no one needed to announce. Stabilizing, a nurse confirmed. I nodded once. That was enough. No celebration. No speeches. Just life continuing. I handed off the final instructions and walked out of the OR without looking back. Not because I didn't care, but because I knew if I stayed, I might finally feel everything I had been holding back for years. And I wasn't ready for that yet. They were still waiting in the consultation room. But something had changed. The panic was gone. What remained was silence. When I entered, no one spoke immediately. My father stood first. "Is she?" he asked, voice lower now. I nodded once. She made it through surgery. A long exhale filled the room. My mother collapsed into her chair like her body finally gave up, holding itself together. Vanessa started crying openly. My father didn't speak for a long time. Then he said something I didn't expect. "Why didn't you tell us?" I looked at him. And for a second, I almost laughed. But I didn't. "I did," I said quietly. Silence. Because they knew I was right. They just hadn't been listening. My mother looked up at me, eyes red. "Can we see her?" I paused. Not out of cruelty. Out of truth. "Yes," I said finally. "But not yet." They didn't argue. They didn't push. Because for the first time, I wasn't something they could demand from. I was the one deciding. Later that night, I stood alone in the hospital hallway again. The lights were softer now. The building quieter. Somewhere behind me, life continued like it always did. But something inside me had changed permanently. Not because of revenge. Not because of validation, but because I finally understood something I had spent years trying to earn from the wrong people. Worth doesn't come from being chosen. It comes from choosing yourself. My phone buzzed once. A message from an unknown number. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I already knew what it would be. Apologies. Regret. Realization too late. I turned the screen off. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anything anymore. Some families don't fail because of distance, they fail because of what they refuse to see. And sometimes the hardest healing isn't being forgiven. It's no longer needing to be understood by the people who once hurt you the most. Real strength isn't in proving your worth. It's in walking away from anything that asks you to shrink to be loved. Because in the end, the people who truly matter will never make you fight to be seen. They will already be standing there when it counts. If this story moved you in any way, share your thoughts. Not because it needs agreement, but because real stories like this often reflect real pain people don't talk about. And if you've ever felt unseen in your own life, remember this. You are not defined by who failed to recognize you. You are defined by who you became anyway.